Good morning. I guess it's almost good afternoon. We are going to start our panel 2 discussion. So we invite everyone to get to their desks or seats so we can have this conversation. Today, I have the pleasure of going over panel number 2, which is rebuilding after disasters. As panel 1 noted, Lahaina and the county of Maui experienced fire disasters back in 2023, which caused massive destruction and left a ton of people displaced. Today, we bring together a host of subject expert matters from the state, the feds, and the county who will discuss with us best practices, examine what happened, and how we can get short-term and long-term housing back on the grounds to the folks in Lahaina, but throughout the West. I want to introduce our moderator and my friend, Deputy Director Joe Campos of the Hawaii Department of Human Services. I'm turning the time over to him.
Aloha, everyone. Joseph Campos, Deputy Director, Department of Human Services for the state of Hawaii. Thank you for coming to Maui to experience and learn what we experienced. As Governor Green mentioned this morning, we would have never have thought that a fire would be something that would have that great of an impact. Of course, we have always heard about Colorado's fires, New Mexico's fires, Arizona, all of the other Western states, but never would I have thought Hawaii would have experienced a fire of such magnitude and destruction. So one of the things that I think is super important is as we go through the panel, we're going to do like 3-minute introductions of who we are, what are some of our main kind of focus points, and what we want you to know about. And then we have some pointed questions for each of the panelists. I'm also a panelist, so don't just think, oh, this moderator talks a lot. Okay. So one thing I also want to point out is our other Deputy Director, Trista Spear from the Department of Human Services, who was equally influential in how we responded to the fire when Governor Green directed the Department of Human Services to figure it out. And one of the interesting things to share with you is that the Department of Human Services is the lead state agency with HAIMA for Emergency Support Function 6, which is mass care and feeding. So it was sort of a natural progression to then say, how do we ensure shelter for the people who have been impacted? I will point out that I was on island day 2. Deputy Director Spear was on island day 3. And this was now August 10th. Deputy Director Spear started as the deputy August 1st. I don't even think August 2nd. She's correcting me. August 2nd. I don't even think we had her email set up, and functioning. As she was tasked with figuring out short-term rentals, RAP, rental assistance program, GAP, the difference between what a family could afford and what the high price of rent in Maui is. So basically, Governor Green said, figure this out. He wanted to ensure that we also took care of residents those impacted, who were non-FEMA eligible. I didn't realize at the time that when you present an idea, the person who presents it is the person who gets tasked with doing it. And so Governor Green, said, okay, do it. And then he also said, supersize it. Because I had thought maybe 200, 250 homes for FEMA ineligible. And he said, supersize it and make it at least 450. So really, one of the important things is having a governor who is supportive and provides you all the tools necessary. After we do our introductions, then we'll go to the first question, which we'll all answer, and then I'll go more into detail about Kalaiola. But over to Roseann Freitas.
Thank you, Joseph. I'm Roseann Freitas with the Building Industry Association of Hawaii. So when I think back to that day in August, I live on Oahu, and I think we were all very devastated to see what happened in Lahaina. Not just it's a fire, but these were people. These were our community and our ohana. And so it was very devastating. From the building industry side, we knew our role would come in later, right? That initial moment is for the American Red Cross and all of the people who know how to handle the immediate disaster. Our first, our emergency providers from the police, the fire, and all of that. But we knew we had a voice, and we knew we needed to figure out how to make that happen. I do want to acknowledge the temporary housing, because it's a twofold, right? You've got to house them temporarily, but you have to think of the long-term build. I did find that the way the state and Governor Green and Joseph, your idea was really good, when they built that non-FEMA eligible housing, was how they didn't think about it just as a building. It's not just a structure, it was a community. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, is how intentional it was to understand the people who were going to live there, what their needs were. It wasn't just, oh, we just got to throw up some housing. It's we have to think about the people that live within those walls. So if that's one lesson to take away, it's putting the people first and helping solve their problems. But then how do we go on to that next building phase? And that's what our members do. So we represent the residential construction market, right? The people who build the homes. So that's our next step. And of course, I think we all know there's a housing shortage. We had that on Maui prior to the fire. It just got really exacerbated with that. But that next step, how do we get there? And I love the conversations before me, because it really was good focusing on safety and all of that. However, we also have to look at how do we balance safety and the cost. And it's hard to talk about it because we don't want to do anything against safety. We're all about safety. But how do we get it so people who can't afford the highest thing can also be safe? And that's probably the bigger question. How do we get to balancing safety and affordability, unfortunately? So I want to keep this short because we got some really good questions.
Thank you very much. Aloha, everyone. Thank you for being with us here today. My name is Josiah Nishita. I'm the Managing Director for the County of Maui. My department also oversees all the recovery functions through the Lahaina wildfire rebuilding process, as well as for our residents upcountry. I have a few slides I wanted to share with you here today. On August 8, 2023, Maui faced 3 major fires at once in Kihei, Kula, and Lahaina, affecting approximately 6,600 acres and impacting thousands of homes, businesses, residents, and visitors alike. But what I really want to highlight for you guys here today, since we have the opportunity with all of you in the room, is really our community's gratitude. And it's not only gratitude to our own state and county officials, but gratitude to all of you in the Western Governors Association and from your states and your teams. We receive support and prayers from all over the country, but directly from each state within the Western Governors Association, manpower, technical assistance, financial assistance, just support across the board, and we just are so appreciative of that, and thankful for all of you and all of your teams for everything that they did to us. I do want to leave you guys with a few things just kind of in the introduction period here. As you prepare for, respond to, and rebuild after disasters, I think the first is keep reminding yourself and your teams why we do what we do and what we're recovering for. And if the community is not involved significantly in shaping and leading your recovery efforts, I think you really should stop and reflect with your teams on who are we recovering for. Involve the community. We've had over 130 community meetings to date since our disaster. It can be really easy to go out there, get yelled at a few times, and never go back. But I would really encourage you folks and your teams to keep going up, keep showing up. The previous panel talked about trust in government and building that trust and communication pathways. that only comes with accountability, with owning up to your mistakes. You know, when you don't know an answer, you tell them. It's a journey along the way that all of you will go through with them, and give them grace throughout the journey. And you know what we've seen in Lahaina and here on Maui, and we've had the opportunity to help others as well throughout the country, is that your community will also give you grace if you continue to show up for them when they need you most. Secondly, I would just really, really urge you to give your teams the support and resources that they need. It can be really easy in the immediate aftermath of a disaster to, you know, provide whatever support and resources are needed. But recovery is a long-term journey. And to keep that top of mind and to keep those resources coming to really support the community who needs it, I'd really encourage that, as well as giving your teams the authority that's needed to make the important decisions throughout the recovery process. There are a lot of interdependencies amongst agencies, policy overlaps, and your recovery teams really need the authority to help make those decisions and kind of resolve some of those things so that the community can recover faster. And then finally, what I wanted to share with you is this is a view of Lahaina immediately after August 8th. And, unfortunately, scenes like this are all too common for communities in your areas as well, just as we see the frequency and intensity of disasters across our country. But, before we kind of get into the panel here today, what I wanted you guys to see was what Lahaina looks like now, which is a image we took from the same exact area about 1.5 years after the disaster from the same view. And what I want you to remember is that while long-term recovery is, some of the hardest work you'll ever do, it's going to be some of the most impactful and important work that you'll ever do throughout your career. So really keep that perspective in mind, because your communities are really counting on you to make this happen for them. So mahalo for all of you being here and for everything that you've done for us, and we look forward to the discussion ahead. Thank you.
My name's Natalie Grant. I'm the director of the Office of Human Services, Emergency Preparedness and Response at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Basically, for human services disaster response, we're the lead agency at the department. And just in terms of framing, my job is to support you all. My job is to support Joe and the Hawaiʻi Human Services Department after a disaster. And I do recall a few days afterwards when I received the phone call from you all, and it was basically a conversation about how quickly could we get out there? How quickly could we get out there to better understand some of the challenges and also be a sounding board for the state leadership and a connector to some of their other colleagues across the Western Governors Association and some of their state partnerships. So lots to talk about as we move through this. I'm going to turn it over to Joe to get us going.
All right. So thank you, Natalie, for keeping us on schedule. Appreciate that. So the first question that we're all going to answer is, or that will be posed to all of us, in the immediate aftermath of Lahaina fire, what actions or emergency policy adjustments were most important in helping residents move from shelter to temporary and interim housing? And then a follow-up on that is, what lessons from those process changes could help improve housing recovery for future disasters? So, again, one of the main points that we took full advantage of was having a governor who was thoroughly supportive and, very direct in what he needed to happen. So thank you, Governor, for that. Also, then the emergency proclamation, which opened up the ability to utilize certain tools in the toolbox to be able to move quickly and decisively. A third thing was, with the emergency proclamation, the Major Disaster Fund, which opened up about $150 million that I utilized. And I actually texted the Chief of Staff, Brooke Wilson, the other day, when we're looking at certain things, because of now the Major Disaster Fund needs to come into place with the floods. And I looked at how much we had spent in the Major Disaster Fund, and I said, what were you thinking giving $150 million to the Deputy Director of Human Services, who has zero experience in development or contracting? I'm a political scientist by trade, and so the response was, you raised your hand. She said some other things which we shouldn't say, but basically it was, you raised your hand and you were there with the Deputy Director Spear. So really, those were the tools that I think were necessary and really helped us move forward. I want to quickly talk about Kalaiola. It translates to the place of peaceful recovery. So it was a name gifted to us by Kumuhula Pueopata. And that really, I think, embodies how we envisioned moving forward. Roseann's comment about the fact that, it was community-led. We talked to our community-based partners. We worked with Homemade Hawaiʻi to move forward, to be able to utilize. We had a pre-development contract for governor's other initiative, the Kauhale initiative, and so we were able to utilize them as the kind of general contractor. But one of the things I really want to point out is that the property management team, which is Pono Property Management, they really addressed the need to have trauma-based, trauma-informed, property management, to be able to fully understand what people go through and how that affects where they're at and moving forward, what can be done. So with that said, I'll keep myself to the 3 minutes and I'll turn that over to Roseann.
So I'm going to reiterate, especially what Joseph said. I got to sit in on one of the planning meetings for the site up there in Lahaina. And it was amazing how they did think about the people, because a lot of people, when you think about Lahaina, and I think this was a case across a lot of the mainland, was that they assumed this was, high-end $1 million homes, that these people made a lot of money. And this is where our workers lived, the people who could least afford to lose a home. And so that is really where I think the state stepped up, because they recognized who was impacted and they got to know them, because this is a mix. If you haven't figured out Hawaii yet, it's very much a cultural, everybody is different. There is no minority. There's no majority race. We're all minorities here, which that's actually really nice. So, but you're taking people with different cultures and you're sticking a bunch of them on 5 acres, right?
57.
Okay, 57 acres. That's a lot more than I thought. Anyway, they're in close proximity to each other. So how do you do this intentionally so that you're recognizing and observing who they are and where they come from and their backgrounds? So I think that's probably the lesson to take away, that was really positive, was that short term. And I know we're going to get to questions later and I'm going to pass it over, but I do think there's some policy issues maybe at the federal level that could help even move things forward even more.
Thanks. I guess what I would add to the discussion is highlighting one thing that I thought, Governor Green had kind of led the charge on this, was a $500 million Maui interim housing plan. And, one thing we've been able to help other communities recovering from disasters since ours. And even though you may not have a housing mission, through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, housing is so critical to people being able to kind of get back to things and be able to refocus on their lives. And, one of the things that we identified or very early on in the state of Hawaii is culturally based and just kind of who we are as a people. There's a lot of partnerships, a lot of community, a lot of community connections that are already in place. And it's really leveraging those systems to help create the necessary change and solutions that are needed. And if, in your own states of wherever you come from here today, if you don't have those in place already, I'd highly encourage you to kind of get ahead of the game, so to say. One of the things that we see so often that is an underutilized resource in people's communities is the local CDFIs, who provide so much opportunity for people and have so much ability to leverage systems in place, funding mechanisms, as well as just policy changes to help really make a difference when we're talking about interim or even the transition to permanent housing. If you don't know your local community foundations, nonprofit partners, your VOAD, your long-term recovery groups, get those systems and partnerships in place now. Being from the county level, I'd really also highlight, here at the state, I feel like we have very good working relationships between our local jurisdictions and our state government, but that's so important for you folks, from wherever you come from, that you know who your officials are, you can get on the same page and make sure that you're adjusting the different policies that are in place, that you're helping to adjust things to meet the same goal at the end of the day, and that they're not in conflict, and that there's synergy between them in effectuating the purposes that you need for recovery. I know we'll get further into kind of a lot of the rebuilding efforts, but I guarantee you one thing, that when you go back home, look at your laws in place now, and I guarantee you that the laws that you have in place are not expecting a disaster to occur that takes out entire cities or counties or jurisdictions within your areas. And when you look at rebuilding, it gets really hard to piecemeal it along the way after a disaster. And so in that preparation and time you have now, it's not a matter of if it will happen, it's really a matter of when in our communities in this day and age. Look ahead and try to see where areas of your laws could be better reflected to address these types of issues before they occur, so that your teams are prepared accordingly.
So before we go over to Natalie to answer the question, I just want to emphasize something that Josiah stated. Hawaiʻi Community Foundation, because of the connection between the governor's office and Hawaiʻi Community Foundation, they also contributed $40 million into the building of Kalaiola. So I just wanted to emphasize that. I would have been remiss if I didn't mention them. So thanks, Josiah, for reminding me. Natalie?
I'd say that my focus, especially in supporting the state, was on speed. How quickly could we support the state through the existing funds and resources that were available, because we know that other mechanisms may take time. So understanding the state's priorities, and then understanding from a federal perspective how we could examine our policy waivers and flexibilities to adapt to that requirement was paramount. Second, I would say it was about connection and ensuring that there were other jurisdictions that could be mutually supportive in a way that I couldn't. Right? And that was probably more appropriate to hear from peer level organizations and groups and leadership across Oregon, California, and Washington State, all of those folks that could then take up some of the burden that was being borne by the broad shoulders of all of you state officials, but recognizing that that support means a lot, especially from your peer network. And then finally, looking ahead, being able to sort of signal what was on the horizon, recognizing that you all are in the midst of that response activity, that you are knee deep in a whole host of issues. You don't have the time, the space, the energy to sort of look prospectively of what's down the pike. That's really what was my priority, to make sure that the now, next, and later was understood, appreciated, so that you had ample sort of run time to get things together.
So just to follow up on that, Natalie, as Josiah mentioned, all of the support we had from many states as well as internationally, has been absolutely tremendous. Oregon's team, and their name escapes me at the moment, but they came down to help. How do you immediately respond to, after the 45-day safe harbor period, when people who were previously homeless, so pre-disaster homeless, were now going to be removed from the non-congregate shelter program? How do you respond to that? So having that connection and that ability to tap the expertise of other jurisdictions that experienced the same thing, I think was really important. And having also Natalie and her team and the office really kind of remind us that it's not just buildings, right? We have to think about how families are going to live in those buildings. How do we respond to the needs of families? You know, and she shouldn't have had to remind the Deputy of Human Services that that was something we needed to think about. But as you're trying to figure out what are we going to do, how are we going to build, you know, to have that reminder, I think was really important. So the next question is going to be directed towards Roseann. As the focus has shifted from emergency response to rebuilding homes, which tools, approaches, and policy or administrative changes have been most effective in helping displaced residents access temporary and permanent housing?
So I think we did a good job covering how we were able to handle that temporary situation. The harder and the bigger one is that permanent residence. And so that is ongoing. And I know Josiah's got some numbers that he's going to share, but that's the harder task, right? And that's really where you need to rely on the professionals, the people who know how to build homes and build it effectively. So that's really where our sector comes in, bringing them into the partnership. But I think sometimes we also need to look at it from the perspective of we don't necessarily think about that long-term build until much later. And that probably should be started to think about as soon as the crisis happens. You have your people who respond immediately, but how do we plan for that rebuild? Otherwise, it can take longer. And we've talked a lot about trauma-informed, and these people didn't just lose the building. They lost their neighbors. They lost their way of life, and most of them lost their jobs. It's a lot more than a structure. So if we can start to look at that sooner and to help get them back into place. Now, I know that the FEMA guidelines do say that they can only do money to support that temporary housing. And that's the one policy change I think could be made, is if we look at it from maybe using that money more effectively to even help with the final rebuild and not just temporary homes. We spend a lot of money on the short term, but maybe if we can apply that to even some of the longer term, it actually might be more cost effective.
Great, thank you, Roseann. So for Josiah, as housing recovery continues in Lahaina, which federal funding sources or recovery tools have been especially helpful, and what insights from that experience may be useful for other communities navigating future rebuilding efforts?
Thanks. Yeah, you know, when we went through our disaster, I would say that the federal landscape has changed significantly since 2023 till now. So, you know, I'd preface everything by saying that, you know, as we go forward, the situation and expectations and policies that you may face may be different than, you know, what we were under at that time. I would say for all of your communities, one of the unsung heroes in FEMA is the Community Assistance Division. And I really feel like, I talked to a lot of states about this, they're very underutilized and not leveraged enough. They're a tremendous group. They helped us so much. I mean, we had you know, assistance across the board through all of our federal partners. If I had to select one that I feel is like very underutilized in other communities that we've seen, it's really that Community Assistance Division in FEMA, helping to provide a lot of assistance for us, manpower, logistical, technical, as well as connecting us to the right resources, and helped us ask questions and think of things that we didn't even know to think about, or what was coming down the road for us. So I would offer that. The use of mission assignments by FEMA and other critical federal agencies was very impactful for us. We're able to get a lot of work done throughout our response and recovery work through the use of mission assignments, and as well as help to limit the amount of, I guess, financial impact and resources that the state and counties, you know, had to put forward in relation to the disaster. And they really helped us expedite our recovery journey. You know, there's traditional programs like BRIC and other federal grants and opportunities that are out there. But, you know, just to highlight a couple through the public assistance and individual assistance process, you know, from the state level, what I'd really encourage you folks to, since public assistance runs, you know, through the state, that, really communicate with your local jurisdictions on the public assistance and stay in sync with them. Most importantly, when FEMA obligates to the funding to the state, work to help expedite that funding back down to the local jurisdictions. That funding can be so critical in addressing the next response activity and or the next recovery piece. When your state is, or if your state is allocated hazard mitigation funding, if your state already doesn't have one, you can evaluate ahead of time to getting an approved state mitigation plan in place prior to disaster, as well as working with your communities. When we talk about staying in sync and building that trust within our communities, a lot of it was directed at where we're allocating support and resources. So try to stay in tune with that. And probably the biggest bucket that's helped us through our recovery journey is the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds. And as the Western Governors Association, as you look at like policy matters and changes, and just from my own personal viewpoint, the disasters hit both Republican and Democrat states. There's really no political ideology in where disaster strikes and or how people are affected or what kind of assistance that they need to get back to recover. And so, some of the things that I think would help jurisdictions and states and local municipalities through that journey could be consideration of permanently authorized CDBG-DR program. The Federal Disaster Tax Relief Act, I think the last I checked, ended with any sort of payments and or settlements from disasters affecting wildfires up till about 2025. So as your states consider kind of the impact to your own communities and what type of resources would be available to your constituents and how that will be, contributed to them and the final impact of any tax consequences or things of that nature, those are some things that could be considered as well. A big thing to note is that time is really one of your community's biggest enemy. And as more time elapses, that pulls away additional resources that were available, maybe funding through their insurance, maybe even hope. And so, as you kind of weigh everything and go throughout your own recovery journeys, or as you plan for that, keep in mind the impact that time and the time elapse that can have on communities and whether they'll be able to recover fully from any disaster. And then finally, I would just note that make sure that you be flexible and adaptable. So, you got to meet the community where they're at and where they are in the recovery journey. And that is a very broad spectrum. And you need a real spectrum of solutions. You can't have a one size fits all or that there's a silver bullet to this. It's that everybody's going to be at a different place at a different time and have a different situation. And so you really do need to have a suite of services and offerings to be able to help people through that process. Just one example that we had in Hawaii, I think is the first that was ever done through our CDBG-DR program, was the Homeowner Opportunity Program, which helped turn renters into first-time homeowners. And so in Lahaina specifically, we had over 80% of individuals were renters, and then the remainder being homeowners, which is generally flipped across the board when you see disasters in other communities. So make sure your programs can be flexible and adaptable and really meet the need of the challenge that's facing your individual community members of where they're at.
Okay, thanks, Josiah. So for Natalie, after the Lahaina fire, the immediate priority was making sure families had a safe place to stay. But rebuilding a community takes more than just homes alone. As Lahaina continues to rebuild, how have human services, family supports, and community connections helped residents regain stability?
I think this was a key area that you all flagged immediately, actually, when some of the family members and their extended families were having difficulty in some of the hoteling lodging because they're not designed for how the community actually lives its life. And in a related manner, when we think about childcare, when we think about all of those other supportive elements that actually help people regain a sense of normalcy. Those are commonly sort of referred to as wraparound services, but I think of them as essential. They're absolutely essential for mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, whomever is within that kinship care family to be able to seek out those resources. They need space to do that. In a related manner, when we think about kids and the disaster impact on children, what does that mean? I know that the panelists upcoming will speak to that. But what does that mean for their mental health, their well-being, when they've been displaced from places that they know, that are comfortable, that are familiar to them? So as we think about the disaster response, as we think about some of those immediate solutions and looking towards the long term, it's really, really important to understand how the community lived its life before, understanding that there are going to be changes because a disaster just happened, but recognizing those core elements that are essential to community values and community networks and connection, maintain that sort of continuity throughout the thread. Because the point at which we start to depart from that is the point at which we risk a lot of critical elements in that recovery that tie into not only the way of life, but also the culture, the fabric of what makes that community so unique.
And Joe, if I may, just in relation to this, and I think this is so important, we talked about housing and kind of the human services element to all this. I'm reminded of a time immediately prior to our fires, was able to go to Texas. We're at an affordable housing conference, and we heard this story of a community meeting that they had, and I think it plays so well back to what we're really trying to get across. And these individuals showed up to the community, and preaching how the American dream can be realized, that if you work hard, you give it everything you got, you strive for hard, a good education, you put your mind to it, that anything is possible, that you can realize the American dream. And, a room not unlike this, filled with individuals from the community, and an elderly lady stood up in the back, raised her hand and asked a question and said, "If I don't have a safe and secure place to lay my head at night, how do you expect me to dream?" And I think, as we reflect back to our recovery journey here, I think no matter whether you have a housing mission in place, whether your community was severely displaced, pushed around to different areas of the country, or they're still contained within your community, housing instability is going to be one of the #1 things that you're going to face. And if you want them to take that next step in the recovery journey, to plan their lives, to help their kids with their education, to get back to work, that is a major obstacle that it's really important to help address along the way, so that you can dream again, so that your community can have hope again. And from policymakers such as this, I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that communities and the world kind of continues to move on, but people still face housing instability. And without that in place, which includes partnerships from all levels of government, they won't be able to take that next step in their recovery journey.
Yeah, and I want to just point out both what Josiah and Natalie mentioned. When we go up to Kalaiola this afternoon, you will see that it was deliberately designed to take into account how people in Hawaii live. The Department of Human Services, Deputy Director Spear and myself, we put time and effort to ensure that each of the units were designed in like a horseshoe shape. So there's 27 pods of 17 to 18 units, rather than just having rows of houses. That was designed because of the multi-generational family, or what we call ohana here, so that you could have grandma in a studio, auntie in another place, a 1-bedroom, and then the nuclear family, in a 2 or 3 bedroom. So Kalaiola is built up of studios, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units. It was also, I remember someone told me, "Why are you spending $4 million on landscaping?" And my response is, because I want it to be a community. I want them to feel like they're coming home. And for me, it was really important for the Department of Human Services to really get that sense of community. Each unit also has access to a flower bed, right, or a planter box, in which they're growing vegetables and things of that sort, flowers. So it was really deliberately designed to have that sense of community to address how people live. So with that said, we have 16 minutes. We'll spend about 10 minutes with question and answers, and then we'll come back for just final thoughts. So does anyone have a question? Yeah.
Great presentation. My name is Annie Vest. I'm the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Department of Emergency Management and representing Governor Stitt, and excited to be here. And thank you all for sharing. Just my curiosity, because there's so many moving parts when you have such a localized recovery along with the state and the federal involved, is did you guys have a joint recovery group between Maui County and the various entities engaged along with the state? And did you all have equal authority to make those decisions, or how did that work relationship based with y'all?
So I'll let the county respond first, and then I'll see if my perspective is a little different or not.
Yeah, and I think we stress this throughout, that coordination and collaboration are so important. That doesn't mean that the county, state, and all the federal agencies agreed on everything all the time. In fact, we had healthy disagreements about a variety of things. But what is so important is that really our goals the same. And that really gets set from, the local leadership, from our mayor, from the state leadership, from governor, and then from, all of our federal agencies all the way on down top. And, without that kind of collaboration and coordination, there are a lot of missed opportunities along the way. I'm sure I can speak for certain for everybody that there are a lot of things, reflecting back that, we could find ways to do differently or do better. But that's why we strive and stress so much for people to prepare ahead of time, that just knowing the day and age that we live in, that it's really not a matter of if, but when that time is coming. And the more you can prepare now, the better you'll be for that recovery journey for your community.
So last night I learned that Hawaii is a little different in how our government is set up, that in many of the states in the continental US, you also have municipalities. So let's just say I'm very happy that we have a county and a state and not, 30 municipalities within Maui County. So I echo exactly what Josiah said. That's my perspective as well. We're a family. Yes, we have familial disagreements at times, but we still love each other, right? I mean, one time I told my sister, I love you, but that doesn't mean I have to like you at this moment. All right. And so, we all work together. It was an immediate collaboration from day one, and the collaboration still continues. I really hope that you get a chance to speak with Deputy Director Spears during the reception tonight or what have you, because she's currently working with the county on the disaster case management program, right, which was originally state-led, and now we're switching it over to the county, and they have been super open and wanting that collaboration. So I thank the County of Maui for that. Any other questions?
Joe, I want to add one other piece to this. I think what was fascinating and very important was exactly as you both indicated, the alignment on the priorities and the leadership alignment, because that helps us at the federal level better understand where do we steer and look more critically at our programs and services that can be aligned with your priorities and initiatives. So that was very challenging at the outset to start looking further downstream. And then once those pieces snapped in, then it made it a lot easier to start to say, these are the priorities. How do we get them to where they need to be? What needs to change or adapt? And then what are the gaps so that we can message those early enough to enable some of that future planning?
Hi, thanks. so much. My name is Colt Hagmeyer. I work at a company called AECOM. It's a global infrastructure company, but I work on disasters. Previously, I worked at FEMA. My question is about public trust. So I know that Maui and Hawaii did a lot of public engagement to try to maintain public trust and trust in government. And I've, in my experience, have found that that is critical because there's often a deficit before a disaster, and the disaster puts people in a really tough spot. And so I was curious if you could talk a little bit about the intentional engagement you did to try to maintain public trust and whether you thought those things were successful in such that public trust has been maintained post-disaster.
So I think Josiah's comment about community and always being engaged with the community, even when they're not happy with you, is important. I'll give an experience with Kalaiola, and then I'm sure others will be able to say something. The original site that we were going to build Kalaiola on is a place called Launiupoko. And that was county land, which the county said we can utilize this. As soon as people heard that we were going to use Launiupoko because of private water source, which we would have to work with, it was really kind of a non-starter. And the mayor came up to me and he said, "Hey, Joe, can we find another location?" So I'm like, yeah, we don't need any more, strife as we're dealing with a, traumatic event. So then we went to a place which is actually land which will be converted to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. So it was actually a win-win for the state to be able to put all of this money. I think about 90-something million went into permanent infrastructure, which will then be utilized for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands for the beneficiaries in the Department of Hawaiian Homelands program. And I believe we've actually sped up that process because Kalaiola goes for another 3 more years. It went from August of 2024, which is when we moved the first people in, through August of 2029. And then at that point, it will be converted over to DHHL for their use. So we were able to speed up by about 17 years. Some even say we are kind of putting in DHHL to do something there because we've done all the site work. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that one because it really it is about building trust, right? It's the just different state and local agencies working together, but at the end, it's the end user, right? The person impacted, and I think that you can't dismiss that. And having those stakeholders who were impacted part of that conversation and part of that decision-making process helps build buy-in, helps come up with innovative ideas, but also just gives them a sense of empowerment, especially as they had lost everything in the fire. So it's really building trust within the community partners, but also building trust with the people impacted.
And if I could just highlight too, because I know we're and there's a lot of great reasons why the community will benefit from all of that and being able to share information and to be able to help continue to restore those relationships and whatnot in government. But I just want to stress for you guys too that there is a benefit for you folks as well and your teams to stay connected and ingrained in the community. Some communities use community meetings, some use block captain programs. There's all different kinds of ways to go about it. I think you got to measure from your own community about what is most appropriate and what your community is asking for. But you do need ground truthing from what's happening. Even us at the county, we're at the local level. I mean, I see everybody in the supermarket, at the soccer fields, at church. Even with that amount of level of insight involvement with what's happening on the ground, we still don't know all of the intricacies of what survivors are actually facing. And so to help you make the best informed decisions, because policymakers are, you're actually trying to do the right thing and you're trying to hit the resources to get to the people who need it the most. And sometimes it can just not land exactly where it was supposed to or what was intended. And getting that ground truth from the community about what's working well or what the needs are, you can ensure that you can be adaptable and help to allocate resources and support as needed to meet the needs of what people are actually experiencing in real time.
Okay, Chenu, we have 6 minutes. Do you want another question or?
Question over there.
Okay.
I think
Aloha, Mr. Campos. Kai Palaio. I live in Lahaina. I would like to say the part about listening to the community, I give you credit. Mahalo. Josiah, mahalo. The buildings, the Kala'iola was built above Leali'i, Hawaiian homes. I live in Hawaiian homes. Immediately following the fire, there was a lot of traffic and things going up and down, and a lot of concern from the community. A lot of tension. And the fact that Josiah, the county, and the people showed up and spoke to us in the road helped that. They were there, and we talk about trust. That trust is face to face. That trust is, we had a meeting about Kala'iola and how we're going to go back and forth to see our families that are living there. We needed a man gate, something as simple as a man gate. And Joe said, yes, we'll have that for you, so you can walk back and forth and see your families. That builds trust. That happens face to face. Very difficult to do. It's more of a comment, but thank you. Because that trust started very early in the fire by those very high tension meetings because people are freaking out. But you stood there, took it, came back, and delivered. The key word was delivered. If you don't deliver, you will not have trust. Thank you for allowing me to comment, Joe.
Thank you for that comment. And, I appreciate our partnership. I will make a comment about the trust building. I remember one of those first meetings in which I felt like St. Lorenzo, right, on the grill. And, there's a joke in Spanish. My wife's from Spain, so, anytime you're getting grilled, you're like St. Lorenzo. And 3 months later, the same person who was grilling me about being at Kala'iola, being at Leali'i, said, so how do I apply? And at that moment, I was like, okay, hopefully we do have the trust necessary. So thank you for pointing that out. I think there was one more question, and I think we're okay, right, with not wrapping up. We'll just do the last question.
Thank you all for the comments and for the great work. Casey Tingle with the Plexos Group and spent about 15 years doing these sorts of programs in Louisiana for a number of events, and now an opportunity to support New Mexico as well. Looking back, you, as I understand it, you were running your program concurrently with FEMA running a similar program. We've had some experience with that in states that I've worked in as well. That can create a lot of confusion, and it can create different expectations and communication about what does, from a community perspective, they just see it as a housing option. Behind the scenes, we're working different eligibility, different timelines, different delivery models, and that sort of thing. 2 questions. One, how did you navigate those differences? And then the second question, if there was a world in which you could have done it all and FEMA simply funded that, would that be an option that you would have taken?
Okay, so actually we are lucky to have 3 people from FEMA, one of whom is Makalapua, and she'll be on the motor coach as we go through Kilohana, which is FEMA's site, and then through Kala'iola. I think what was important is that FEMA, if I'm not mistaken, Makalapua, immediately wanted to have cultural training, right? And so to understand how to address the Hawaiian community. But yes, there was a lot of confusion, right? About, wait, is this Kilohana or Kala'iola? What happens? I applied to Kilohana, because I'm FEMA eligible. How come I can't be in the FEMA non-eligible site? So there's a lot of confusion. I think this is where the property management team also is important, right? And that connection with the community, working with your community-based organizations, working with people in the community, having that ability to say, what are your issues? What are some of your concerns? And responding in an appropriate manner. So I think that for me was the most important thing. And I know Roseann wanted to chip in some ideas in the last minute.
I'll talk fast.
Okay.
So moving forward, how can we address this before it becomes a problem, and what can we put in place? So we do need to always look at regulation, and for us here in Hawaii, permits. How can we streamline that, make that faster, maintaining safety, but not make it so long? So I think that's something from a state and local level that we need to address, but probably even more so here in Hawaii. And I don't know your neighborhoods, but I'm not concerned about our new homes. I am concerned about our existing inventory that dates back to a median age of 1979. So how do we help our community get their homes more resilient when they don't have money? And that's probably the bigger question I think we have moving forward in Hawaii.
So I would say my home is 1920, fourth generation family home. But yeah, I hear you on that. I'm looking at updating. My electrical system is still knob and wire. Yeah. So I know. So yeah, no, we're good. But yeah, so that's an important point. I'm getting told to stop. But anyway, let me just I'm sorry? Oh, disaster. Oh, I thought you were doing stop. Yeah, DCMP, Disaster Case Management Program. One of the things though is I just want to do one quick comment. Hawaii, I mean, we built Kalaiola. We allowed from April 1st of 2024 was groundbreaking. We moved the first 8 families in August of 2024. So basically in 5 months, we were able to start putting people in. It took 18 months to build altogether, on the 57 acres, 432 homes. One of the things I would love to see, at least in Hawaii, is for us to have the resiliency and the ability to respond quickly with inventory of homes that we can use in a disaster. Of course, we have so many other issues with unhoused individuals, lack of affordable housing. But I think, the fact that it takes 6 weeks at least to bring modular homes over or equipment over, can be a real problem for Hawaii. So with that said, any last minute, I know people are going to go to lunch, but any...
All I want to say, since I'll throw Trista a solid here since she brought that up, but honestly, I think at the time, I'm not sure if it still is, but I think Hawaii was one of the fastest to stand up disaster case management program. And it's so invaluable to you folks, to be able to make data informed decisions. We I guess, identify success pretty simply here, and that's keeping our people home. And our mayor says it all the time. If all we do is build back businesses and homes and these physical structures, but we don't recognize the faces within them, then we've really failed our mission. And without tools such as what the state stepped in to assist with, and what we're working to transition over support for to the county and other resources from that disaster case management side, that's really going to help people to be able to connect the dots in their recovery journey, to help to be linked up to resources that are needed, and then to provide your elected officials, your decision makers, your policy folks, and your on the ground resources and staff to be able to make decisions that are appropriate and effective to meet the needs where they're at. So with that, I guess we'll kind of end this.
Well, and Chenu, are you here? Okay. Yeah, we'll turn it over to him and then he'll end.